welcome, Mikki. You have been on my list for a solid year. So I can't believe it's finally here where I finally get you for this podcast recording.
I am just so stoked to be asked to come on the Bod Pod and talk to you ladies about all things nutrition and all the things really. Like, I'm so honored. So thank you, Haley. Thank you, Laura.
Yes. Well, let me tell you, I feel like I'm like, why does everyone on the other side of the world, like this is who I always connect with?
I know.
Mm-hmm. Well, I don't know what you guys are doing on the other side of the world, but I'm like, my triathlon coach years ago was, from Australia. And I'm like, this is just who I gravitate towards. But I'm so excited because let me tell you what I love most about, and I have 9 million questions to ask you, but I love the simplicity that you have with nutrition. So you're super into the evidence, number one. But I feel like everyone says that nowadays. Everything is as evidence-based, which I do too, but I reach out to people that know the evidence that are way smarter than me with PhDs. But that you also aren't afraid to like make your stance, even if it's something that isn't trending in I don't know, on socials. And I love that because I know I'm getting real, honest, truthful information. And before I start, I'm going to say, I listen to your podcast and I love. Like you were already up here. And then now you were like up here when you like called yourself out. You were like, well, somebody called me out and said, what is this research? And you were like, I had to pull back myself and be like, where am I getting this from? So I love that you're not afraid also to change your mind. Or as the science comes out, you're like, well, we've always thought this, but guess what? As a scientist, this is the way that this is what it says. So we have to take that into account.
Yeah, and you really do, Haley. Like I learned, I feel like, when you come through the university system, as I did in nutrition, you learn one way. I've got my science and my science degree in nutrition, plus physical activity in education, and you think you know it all. Actually, you're quite arrogant, or at least I think I was, and so I really had my blinkers on to all of the other information that was out there from the likes of people who really understood nutrition much more than I did, just because I had a degree. But it really took me like at least 10 years post my study to actually realize that there is more to research than just one paper and one interpretation of a paper. And so I think that I really had to check myself then, and it was a really good lesson for me, I think. And so I'm actually quite distrustful of people who are very black and white, because nutrition particularly, as you guys know, of course, physical activity is not just black and white. It's about the individual in front of you. And I feel like that's a message that we need to keep talking more about, because otherwise you can just leave a lot of people confused about the thing that's best for them.
Okay. Yes, let's tackle that right away. Because I just had Abby Smith-Ryan on. I don't know, I'm sure you're familiar with her.
Yes.
And I kind of asked her the same questions, and she was like, Haley, people are making this so much more complicated than they need it to be. Yeah. And, where I run these nutrition groups with, again, I don't have the PhD. So I always seek out, people that can like, you read the research. This is your job. Read the research and then tell me, how we're translating this. So I know enough, but I always seek out these partnerships that for sure are, more, they know more information than me. But if we're looking at this and women come in and they're like, tell me exactly my macros and exactly how much of this I'm supposed to do. And I'm like, it doesn't work that way.
Yeah.
And if someone is selling you the exact macro fix, with knowing nothing about you, like we have ballparks, we have guidelines for cardio and nutrition, but you run your own groups. And I love that from the nutrition side, I'm like, okay, you know all there is. I mean, you're the person that I would look to and be like, Mikki knows her stuff. She knows her stuff, and she's going to give me the right information, whether I think it or not. So if we're talking about how you and your or like how you approach nutrition
Mm.
and we're talking about the macros.
Mhm.
Is there a specific macro, or for women that are coming to you, do those macro budgets in a group setting, maybe not individually?
Mm.
Do you have like, where do carbohydrates play a role in compared to protein in comparison with fat?
Yeah, yeah, great question, Haley. And you know what? For most of my nutrition sort of career, I haven't really talked to people a lot about macros. And I know macros are very in right now, like not right now, but they're the thing now. And people can go and do courses on macros in the weekend to become a macro coach and help assist people with that. But I've always thought that, we don't really eat macros, we eat food. And that's a
Mm.
language that sort of simplifies it for people. And it's funny because I even get people who sort of say to me, "Oh, tell me what macros that I should be eating," and then I sort of have a conversation with them and realize that they're not willing, or they don't understand that, if knowing the macros is one thing, but how do you know how that translates into your real life? You then have to track your food, you have to measure everything you eat, you have to be very calculated. And many of us, particularly with women of our age, like we're running busy careers in households and children and maintaining relationships and doing all of the other things. Do we really have the time and the energy to now focus and dial down as much as we think we do with regards to our diet? Because as you sort of said, it's actually not, that's sort of getting really micro, whereas actually it's big picture. That's how I like to sort of approach things. Having said that though, um, protein, as you know, and I know that you agree, it's the thing which most people sort of fall short on. Even people who think they have a high protein diet because they're having a protein smoothie in the morning and chicken at lunch and maybe a steak at dinner, don't they sort of underestimate the amount that they actually need. So I talk to them. So with regards to the actual amount that I talk to them about, I'm like, look, the RDI is set at zero point 0.8 grams per kg body weight, which most protein metabolism experts suggest that's woefully inadequate. And if we doubled that, that would be probably a good starting point for most people. Look, and there are of course individual differences, but let's just generally say 1.6 grams. But then if we're thinking about fat loss, which is what I talk to a lot of women about, we're thinking more at least 2 grams per kg body weight, if not up to maybe even 2.4 grams per kg body weight. And when we are talking in these gram amounts, a lot of this information comes from protein's role with initiating muscle protein synthesis. You want that synthetic response to be able to repair and rebuild muscle. But of course, protein does so much more than that. But it's hard to measure exactly, I suppose, how much protein we need for neurotransmitter production, or to help calm the brain, or to help regulate the appetite, and so many other factors come into play. So it does become a little bit more individual. Like if I've got two people in front of me, and one of them is someone who and they both want fat loss, and they're both of a similar body size, and I have these sort of targets for them, someone might fare really well on, let's say, 2 grams per kg body weight of protein, and they may easily meet that requirement, not feel hungry and distracted by that hunger, in between meals, and not feel lacking in energy, and not feel like anxious and things like that. And they may be great. But the other person who might appear on the face of it to be very similar, they might have a lot of food noise going on. They may need, from a diet perspective, they may need more protein because they need more food to be able to feel fuller for longer. Whereas the other person might be good on just small amounts of food. Someone else might need that real stretch signal from their stomach to help them feel satisfied. And they may also have some anxiety more so than the other person, which may then require just additional amino acids to help calm the brain down and things like that. So I always have a starting point, but I always need to understand the person in front of me, which does make it a bit more challenging when you're in that group situation, right? When you've got 400
Yeah.
people and you give them this plan and you're like, go with it. But I mean, that's not how I run my programs. I'm sure, much like you would, you're in the trenches with them and you're answering questions and you're tweaking a sort of foundation plan to make it work for them. And I always encourage people to just listen to the signs that your body is giving you. Like
Mhm.
when you eat in the way that we suggest, where you do moderate protein, and moderate carbohydrate, and you're eating in a calorie deficit, but you're stabilizing your blood sugar, you can be much more confident that your body is giving you messages about how hungry you are, and how you feel. Whereas if you're on a lower protein diet and you may be overshooting the carbohydrate because of that low protein diet and your blood sugars are fluctuating, then a lot of what we feel could be related to those blood sugar fluctuations, and they're not true sort of signals from your body.
Mhm.
So I always start with protein. I'm very long-winded. I'm so sorry. You asked about carbohydrate as well. And
Yes.
yes, and I think can get people can misinterpret what low carbohydrate sort of means. I think that's an important thing to put on the table, because I am someone who advocates for a lower carbohydrate approach, particularly as we head into perimenopause and we become more sort of insulin resistant due to the changing sort of fluctuating hormones and inflammation, and the reduction in estrogen across that perimenopausal phase. But it doesn't mean like a keto diet. It doesn't mean that you're eating 20 grams of carbohydrate or less. I sort of look at, if I'm thinking about a meal for someone and I'm putting it together for them, I want maybe equal parts protein and carbohydrate, or maybe a little bit less carbohydrate. But then if you're active, we want to pop some additional carbohydrate in there. So I don't know, I might be anywhere from maybe 30 to 40 grams of carbohydrate in a meal. And if someone is in the endurance space and they do require more carbohydrate to help replenish that glycogen post exercise, then we're going to be adding in some additional carbohydrate there, which isn't the same as a ketogenic diet, but it's still a relatively low carbohydrate diet compared to what maybe the general population is eating.
Okay, so two questions. One, I get this question all the time, so I'm sure you do too. Too much protein is bad for the kidneys.
Ah, mm.
What does the science say about that?
Yeah, great question. And, up until maybe even like a month ago, there a couple of meta analyses, and I believe they may have been published back in 2018. Fact check that, might not be right, but that showed there was no difference in kidney function
Mhm.
between so for people with who had a normal kidney functioning. There was no difference low protein versus high protein, i.e., high protein intakes did not affect kidney function. Now, they changed the function of the kidney, so there was a little bit more activity across with the markers that they used to assess kidney function, but it wasn't detrimental. It just meant the kidney was working a bit more, but it wasn't harder. It wasn't straining it, I guess is how you might put it. But even most recently, I think in the last month, there's been a study published that has shown that a higher protein diet is beneficial for someone even with a low kidney function as well. So there's this long-standing myth that protein negatively impacts the kidney, based on data showing that people with stage 4 chronic kidney disease uh, are recommended to have a low protein diet. And that's a category of I guess a patient, which is very different from the general population.
Mhm. Are you a fan of a continuous glucose monitor?
uh, it, for some reason, this is also quite controversial, isn't it? But I actually am.
Mhm, it is.
I'm
Yeah.
asking you all the controversial
I
questions,
know.
just FYI, because I know you'll shoot it straight, and I know you'll
Yeah.
shoot it from the evidence and the research of what it says.
Yeah,
I love it.
and you know what, Haley? Like, I understand why people are somewhat opposed to just focusing on one particular thing. Like, I think they are concerned that if we strap a CGM on someone, then they will aim to just have an absolute flatline glucose without thinking at all about other aspects of health or other aspects of diet. But look, I just think that the more that we can understand how food affects our bodies and how food affects our metabolism and how we dispose of that glucose, just the better you're able to make choices that are going to affect your long-term health. Because isn't that just what we want? Like, I mean, they're expensive. So there's not something that I would say to everyone, you need a CGM. But if someone comes to me and says, do you think it would be helpful? Then I'm going to have that conversation with them that actually, maybe you could glean some really good insights into how your body reacts to the types of foods that you eat and how you can sort of manage that. Because I think when it comes to blood sugar, like we often are measuring or looking at markers that are just too far down the line. We're
Mhm.
waiting for things to go wrong in order to fix them rather than putting into place the preventative measures that can prevent them from going wrong in the first instance.
Oh, okay. So let's move on to the protein timing. So we have all this new research that has come out about how much protein we can kind of utilize, where it used to be like 30 grams, and then now it's like up to 60 grams. eh, for again, like I really want to hone in on what the evidence would show for peri post menopause, because that's who I work with, or if we're just assuming certain things for the peri postmenopause group, and maybe there's not a ton of research uh, in that area. Does protein timing matter? And if so, what does that look like over our meals throughout the day?
Yeah, great question. And I love that you asked, what is it that we assume or what is it that we are just sort of taking almost our best educated guess? Because to the best of my knowledge, there is not a body of literature that has looked specifically at women in perimenopause and assessed different amounts of protein at any one meal and the effect on muscle protein synthesis, which, as I said earlier, is the main marker which we use to assess that sort of, I suppose, protein timing um, uh, aspect. So, but what we do know is that the older we get, the more protein we need in any one particular time in order to initiate muscle protein synthesis and to get that meet that protein threshold. And I'm pretty sure it's Don Layman, his research, he's looked at older individuals that might be above 60 years of age and has shown that for them to get a robust signal in the brain, they need to have 40 grams of protein in a meal in order to initiate that sort of maximal muscle protein synthetic response. Yet, if you look at someone who might be, say, 25, so young and healthy, then they only require maybe 25 grams of protein in a meal or even 20 grams of protein in a meal. But there's nothing specifically looking at females and there's nothing specifically looking at their age group. So what I say to the women that I work with, which are largely in that same group that you work with, Hayley, is that we aim for 40 grams of protein in a meal because as you age, the brain sort of almost turns down that little like a little dimmer switch, if you like. And so you just need almost more of everything to get that same response. And so we aim for 40 grams of protein at breakfast and we aim for 40 grams of protein in the evening meal because we know that you sort of need 2 times in the day to be sort of hit that muscle protein synthetic response. And then we aim to collect the rest of our protein across the course of the day, depending on overall protein targets or some of those things we were discussing sort of earlier. Albeit as well, and I'm sure you've heard this before, is there hasn't been a lot of research done at that lunchtime period. So whether or not someone is good on 10 grams of protein at lunch or 30 grams of protein at lunch, I mean, we just don't know that. And
Mhm.
then you just got to go back to sort of asking people how they feel. But I am quite, I guess, dogmatic about the breakfast meal because we're coming out of like an overnight fast. A lot of us, we may have just done some training, fasted training as well, and we're in that catabolic state. So you do need at some point in order to optimize your health, you need to sort of switch that to some more sort of anabolic sort of state. So I'm really big on that. protein at breakfast.
Yes. So let's cover that, because the fasted training, you had a post on that. And when we look at that, like, obviously we don't want to do these long periods of time without food. And we know that from like low energy availability, the research that has come out for low energy availability, even like throughout the day. If we look at all of that research, and again, we're specifically talking about this population, if a female gets up in the morning and she's like, well, I've got to work out at 5 and I've got to run, but I don't want like a belly full of food, what is your recommendation? And I'm guessing that's all on the science that is out there. What does that mean for their protein? Can they split it up? A little bit before, a little bit after, or all before or all after, as long as it's within a window? What does that look like? Because there's a lot of talk and a lot of chatter about the window and, where that goes with protein specifically.
Yeah, great. So the thing with the protein threshold is you do need it in one meal. So you can't get 20 grams before training, 20 grams after training, because you're not hitting that threshold to initiate muscle protein synthesis. So if someone is having something before training, it doesn't mean that they can then subtract that from their next meal. Like that's in addition to. And look, Hayley, I'm not sure about you, but I've worked with thousands of women over my time, and women are so different. Some women can get up, go for a 45-minute, maybe even a harder run or do a harder session, and it's no big deal to them. Hormones fine, sleep is fine, energy is fine, hunger is fine, body composition is fine. There's nothing actually off. But some women, if they get up and train fasted, then that just upsets they get hormone disruptions, that upsets their sleep, it upsets their energy, their cravings later on in the day. So there's not a big body of research that has actually looked at fasted versus fed training in terms of its long-term impact. We know from a performance perspective, fed will always trump fasted training. We know that. But that's not always the goal of someone getting up, going for a run at 5 a.m. in the morning. Sometimes it's just to get exercise. We're not all sort of have that athletic mindset. We also know that there's no difference in terms of fat loss, whether you train fed or you train fasted. There is a difference in substrate utilization. So you will burn more fatty acids when you train in a fasted state compared to if you have like a carbohydrate before training, but that won't affect your overall fat loss if calories are accounted for. So these are some of the things we do know, but I don't know that it's correct to say that no woman should train fasted. Like there is no, like I'm not sure where that what markers we're looking at to determine that this is dangerous for all women. When I'm working with women in my fat loss groups who are in a calorie deficit, I do say to them that to get up and train and have something before they train. Because when you are in a calorie deficit, those sort of guardrails do change a little bit compared to when you're talking to a woman who is just aiming to maintain her already healthy body composition. Because you are running on less calories. So it is more of a stress on your body. So you do need it, and you want to get the most from that training session. And you want to be able to recover well from that training session so you can do it again. And when you've got less calories to play with, all of those things become a little bit more challenging. So I do recommend that in a fat loss phase, if you're training early in the morning, we try to get something in. And that something might be, it might just be a serve of protein in water or unsweetened almond milk, or it might be like a banana or something, whatever they can tolerate. That then sort of makes them, they've got a little bit of fuel on board, but it's not going to be so much that they're sort of choking down a breakfast. But then afterwards, we still want that sort of minimum amount of protein that I was talking about, that sort of 40 grams of protein.
Okay, so we want the threshold to be the 2.5 grams of leucine is really the protein synthesis, like that threshold. We want to have the 2.5 grams of leucine in there. But if it's before, and then say like they wake up at 5 and then they work out at 6, then they might not need it, right after if they got 40 grams before. But that window, if somebody decides to wake up and says, has a 40-minute run, and it's all in context, is it a super hard, run where you're trying to beat something, or is it more of a chill run? Then you want to eat. If you didn't have anything, then maybe you want to eat fairly close after that, so that we're kind of in that peri workout phase of fueling the body. Not necessarily like no one's getting results if they don't do it this way or the exact way.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So I, if it is a super hard run, then I am going to encourage someone to have something before they go out. And a lot of that comes down to habit, because we get in the habit of doing things a certain way, and our body anticipates food at certain times, and that is a trainable thing. So if you never eat before getting out training, and your training starts suffering, then I'm going to say, hey, let's try and put something in there, and it'll take a little bit of adjustment, and you can start small, but it's literally just to help you sort of get through your training period. However, if you think about physiology, like the other time to think about pre-training fueling is actually the evening before, like the dinner, because that's how you're going to restock a little bit of that glycogen into your muscles at that point. And then overnight, it's your liver glycogen that depletes. It's not your muscle glycogen that depletes. So, which is, the liver is like a little holding, like a holding bay for glucose and carbohydrate, and that depletes overnight. But it only takes like a little bit of, maybe a little bit of carbohydrate, or even just some sprinting, like that physiological sort of sprinting exercise, sort of will then allow some of that muscle glycogen to travel to the liver, to then be sort of pushed out into the bloodstream. So if you can't eat before training, if you really can't, then aim to have a decent dinner with some carbohydrate in it the night before, and then get in your nutrition post training within 15-20 minutes if possible. And I'm always going to say, I typically say a protein shake and a banana, and maybe it's because you always sort of go down like what would I usually have. Like, a lot of my recommendations come from the things that I
Exactly.
like, and yeah, that's the thing which I would normally like. But I yeah, and the older you get, I think you need a little bit more leucine than 2.5 grams, actually. Like, I think it might be, I'm pretty sure it's closer to 3 to 3.5, which I know seems like why would I even mention that? But because it's harder to get it in normal food.
Well, then that would be the recommendation more for 40 grams versus maybe 30 grams.
Maybe. Yeah,
Yeah.
I think so. Yeah.
So that's good to know too.
I know. I feel like this is a confusing topic. Haley and I have talked about it before, what to eat before, what to eat after to get your maximum benefit. But on that too, I feel like this might not have to do with people that are focused with athletics, but I still feel like a lot of women are waiting, doing the intermittent fasting and
Mm.
waiting to eat. And I hear all the time, I don't have my first meal until noon or 1 o'clock. What is your thoughts on that?
Yeah. I do my best to encourage people away from that practice if they're training in the morning. And look, I will say that intermittent fasting is a really powerful tool for people with severe insulin resistance and really poor metabolic health. And so a lot of what you read on social media is targeted towards that population. But of course, those messages are everywhere. They hit everyone. And so you're
Mhm.
picking them up and you're thinking, maybe this is what I sort of should do. And I know the mentality around that, Laura, could be, well, if I get up and I train, I'm burning calories, and then I'm not replacing those calories. So this will just help my calorie balance later in the day, because I'm going to be hungry later in the day anyway. So I may as well save them. And the other thing which often comes up is, well, I'm just not that hungry in the morning. And coffee suppresses your appetite. Being busy suppresses your appetite. And most people that we work with, they're either busy at home or they're busy at work. And it's really easy to put off that meal. And they think they're getting the benefit from it. But, Haley talked about low energy availability through the day. And that's a
Mhm.
big thing. Even if you don't have low energy availability, you can still disrupt hormones. And there's research to show that acute bone turnover markers are compromised if you go for hours without food post training, even if you are meeting your calorie targets for the day. So, it's so hard to hold on to muscle and bone as we age, and particularly through perimenopause and menopause. That's accelerated aging, essentially. So we need to do all we can to hold on to muscle and bone. And the practice of getting up and training and then fasting across the morning is so detrimental to those two things that I just try to encourage people against it. Because the other thing which people don't sort of realize from a fat loss perspective is that it's really easy to overshoot your calories in your smaller eating window if you do that. Because even if you have a
100%.
really full meal, you can still feel unsatisfied. And then you are constantly grazing in the kitchen, or you're really like hanging out for that after work wine that then you open a bag of chips, but it's fine because you fasted in the morning. So it's all about, so we just make these
Yeah.
little justifications in our head, but it does us in. And most people, Laura, and I'm not sure what your experience is, but this doesn't work long term for most people. So most people I see
Mhm.
are already doing this and it's not working for them, but they haven't quite made that connection or connected the dots themselves.
Exactly. You actually set up my next question perfectly. In the last 3 weeks, I have talked to 3 different women who were diagnosed with osteoporosis, and they're 40.
Oh,
So young, and a couple of them are starting the carnivore diet. But as I walked away from those conversations, I thought, what is the best thing to do, even to not get to that point also?
yeah.
But, what can we do? But even if you don't have osteoporosis and we're 40, what can we do to prevent that from happening?
Yeah. So I think the number one thing, which I talk a lot about as well, even though my main area of education is nutrition, I
Mhm.
use the fact that I have a phys ed degree as almost like, well, I can still talk about this as well. But I have to say, I think strength training is one of the best things. Like, and
Mhm.
most of the experts would say if. And you'd never have to choose between protein and strength training, but strength
No.
training is the thing, right? It's that mechanical load of the muscle and the bone, and what occurs when you actually do that progressive overload type work, which isn't necessarily hitting 3 by 5 in the gym. You don't have to go from the couch to deadlifting your body weight or anything like that, but that working to failure, however that looks. So I think strength training is probably the thing, even though, of course, we're here to talk nutrition. So protein is
Yeah.
the next thing
Yeah.
to my mind. And I know that you agree, and we already talked about the amounts of protein that I normally sort of operate in. And then outside of that, we've got creatine, and we know that currently the research supports, particularly for older women, but there's no reason why you wouldn't think about this for women in their younger years. Like if you're doing strength training and your protein intake is good, then creatine may potentially help with bone as well. The research is really emerging there. Uh, Vitamin D is essential. And down here in New Zealand, the sun doesn't have enough strength in those UVB rays to help us synthesize vitamin D in winter, despite how sunny it is. So most people in New Zealand would need to supplement during winter. It's not a very good public health message. Like no one talks about this, but that's definitely something which I talk to a lot of people about. And then, there are these other trace minerals that don't even really get featured when we think about bone health. Things like boron and silica are 2 trace minerals, which are super important for bone. I discussed on a podcast with someone called Dr. Charles Price, and he did a lot of investigation into osteoporosis when his wife got osteoporosis back in the 80s, and he came up with some supplements. And he wasn't just trying to sell us supplements. He's moved on from that thing, but his research showed that, in our sort of modern diet, we don't get a lot of these sort of trace minerals that are really important for bone either. Collagen is something else I'm really like big on, and I'm sure that you guys are familiar with research to show how and I know it's case study research and it's preclinical research as well, so there's not large human clinical trials, but there's a suggestion that accelerated sort of healing of tendons and ligaments, and I want to say bone, but I might be wrong about that. So fact check me on that one. But that accelerated healing can occur when you sort of put collagen peptides in with a little bit of vitamin C. And there is research from Dr. Mike Ornsby's lab of women in midlife taking 10 grams of collagen, having a reduction in joint pain and knee pain. And this is in an athletic sort of population, women like us. So I'm going to also suggest that people take collagen as well.
I want to really dive into and start with the cardio portion. So we hear a lot, and there are definitely sides of the different types of cardio that peri and postmenopausal women should do. What does the science say, the current science say? This is where I feel like, any exercise is good exercise. And if it's getting you out the door, that's what you should be doing. But where does that come into place in this age group?
Yeah, great question, Hayley. And there's just so much chatter about this right now as well, because I'm absolutely with you. I'm like, any exercise that someone can do is going to be great. And zone and the zone 2 training is the one that immediately pops to mind. There seems to be some camps that say women should not do zone 2 training and don't need to do zone 2 training. And then there are other people, probably a bit like us, that are like, do what you love, get out there and just move, because it's important as well. And as far as research goes, to the best of my knowledge, there've been no human clinical trials of women in our age group to show that zone 2 training is neither is detrimental or sort of neutral to health. And we often hear that women are more metabolically flexible than men, so they do not need to do the zone 2 training for the same reasons that men do zone 2 training. And if they're thinking about metabolic flexibility, I think that they may be referring to, there are a couple of things that they're referring to, and one of them is how much fat we burn during exercise. And many studies have shown that women do tend to burn more fat during exercise than men, so they're more metabolically flexible that way, and they can better access carbohydrate stores. But those studies aren't done on perimenopausal women; they're done on young women. And I think this is where the real difference lies, because there is research to show that women in perimenopausal and postmenopausal age are less metabolically flexible. They lose that metabolic flexibility. So they lose the ability to burn fat, which sort of so they have a suppressed fat oxidation. So they're more likely to burn sugar and rely on sugar. And that's when that's sort of kicks off this metabolically inflexible system. And if you can't burn fat as a fuel substrate, and you need to rely on sugar, then you just run the risk of ramping up inflammation, fluctuating blood sugar levels, increased cravings, reduced energy. And that's just from a almost like what someone might feel point perspective, but under the hood, it's it sets you up for poor metabolic health. So the idea that women in our age group don't need to do zone 2 training just seems, it doesn't make sense in my mind, to be honest.
Yes, and we're both 47.
Yeah.
But I like something that you said in the podcast, in one of your podcasts, where you said just because we might be born with more type 1 muscle fibers doesn't mean that that's the way we stay for the rest of our life.
Well, it's interesting, Hayley, because I looked at that research too. And, the research that I saw on it, and I might be missing a whole bunch of papers, which, I could be, but from what what it appears is that women do tend to have a higher percentage of type 1 fibers compared to men. But those amount of fibers in our body is actually quite a small percentage of the overall fiber types that exist. So that they would make a real meaningful difference to your metabolic flexibility is questionable to begin with. But also some of the research I see that is used to promote the idea that we don't need to do zone 2 training, that research itself shows that sort of beyond the age of 60, those differences change, those differences are no longer there. So, if we're thinking about women as we're into perimenopause, postmenopause, and beyond, like there is no real difference between men and women in terms of those muscle fiber types as well. So, one, I don't know how meaningful that is. It might be statistically significant, but how meaningful is it in real life? And two, those differences seem to dissolve. And hey, but again, like I say, I'm not diving into muscle fiber type papers every day and haven't done a PhD on it. So maybe I could be missing something.
Okay, well, for your PhD in nutrition, this is what I always get asked too. And I'm running a course right now. And so these questions are it's a very large group. And there's a lot of questions. Can you lose, or what does the current research say about, can you lose visceral and body fat if you aren't in a calorie deficit?
No, in order to lose fat, so you like in terms of if you're going into a fat loss phase, you absolutely need to be in a calorie deficit. Visceral fat might be different, like because visceral fat can change when you change your diet or change your practices around training, and when you this is in fact where a little bit of intermittent fasting for these people might actually be beneficial. But fat loss requires a calorie deficit.
Yes. Okay. So, I mean, and that's the hard thing, is I think that a lot of women, at least coming into my courses, they have always been under fueling and over exercising. And they're like, I don't want to go down that road again. And I think there's a whole different conversation for disordered eating.
Yeah.
And that I'm not talking about today. But if we look for the general female that's like, okay, I got the message. I'm going to start strength training. I'm cleaning up my diet. I'm, listening to all of these things that you say. I'm adding more protein, blah, 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 all of this stuff. Can they significantly shift their body fat percentage, the amount of body fat they carry, if they are not in a calorie deficit?
I don't think so.
Okay. I haven't ever seen it. I mean, there's body recomposition where you can like lose fat, build muscle. It's such the holy grail that for women that I work with one-on-one, it's just not like these body transformations aren't happening where you're in a surplus and losing body fat.
No, like what I think, Hayley, and this is in my practice, women who are quote unquote doing all the right things, there's just something missing. And this is where, we know how I said in our earlier episode that, I don't necessarily think all women need to track calories or track protein like that. That's not something that I do a lot of counseling around. But if you are someone who feels you are doing all of the things and nothing's shifting, then you need to track, actually. Like that is, I think so. Like I think, someone I work with a couple of different sort of types of women, and one type is one that seems to have dieted all of their lives. They've done all the things and they've never really sort of been successful long term. But then I also deal with women who have been lean all of their lives and they've never had to exercise in a way to manipulate their body composition. It's just sort of naturally been, slim. So they're healthy because of course we've always, I did sort of little quotation marks there because we've always we've always equated being slim with being healthy. It's not the case, but that's just how our mind operates. But then once they come into perimenopause, they don't necessarily gain weight, but their body composition does change, and they do, they get a little bit leaner in the limbs because they lose muscle mass. They get a little bit rounder around in the middle, and they just don't feel in their bodies. And so for these two different women, like the first one I described, where they felt like they were doing everything right, like they could benefit from tracking to actually seeing what's going in, because sometimes they are still overeating on calories, even if they're good calories, or they're doing what Laura was talking about in our previous conversation, where they're starving themselves in the morning and then they're absolutely overshooting later on. So actually picking up those habits are really helpful. But then if you are a woman like the one I described, who has been lean all of her life and now only struggling with body composition changes, they may not necessarily need to track. They actually probably do need to just focus on upping the protein sources in their diet, and they've likely got appetite regulation cues already in place because they've been lean all of their lives, and so they probably can regulate a lot better and may not necessarily need to track.
Yes. And I love that you said that. And I love this that you had on your Instagram. I deserve to weigh less for the work I'm putting in.
Yeah.
I mean, how many times
I
do you
love
heard,
that.
hey, like I this all the time, Haley, I'm doing everything right. I'm
Yes.
doing everything right.
Yes.
And so it must be that my thyroid is low, or it must be this. But 99% of the time, and this is a super hard conversation to have with someone when they're not getting results, is they're like, well, maybe I'm not doing enough HIIT. Maybe I'm not, my food timing is, I'm like, no. Take out all of that and let's look at the basics.
Yeah.
The very basics.
Yeah.
So when someone says that to you, I've been putting all this work, like most of the time, is it that they're eating too much, or is it because the protein timing is off, or they're not doing enough of the right cardio?
Yeah. No, it's 100. It is that they're eating too many calories than their body is able to burn, and I guess this is a good time to sort of just think about the other lifestyle factors that come into play that do change how your body burns calories too, right? Like the lack of sleep, like the stress, like these do impact on our hormones and impact how your body utilizes carbs and fat. And it can mean that even if you are on lower calories, you can, your body can sort of almost, it'll take those calories and store them rather than burn them. So particularly women of our age group, stress and anxiety for a lot of women can sort of kick up quite a bit. And that will impact both how their body responds to the food that's going in, but also their behavior around food, and what they choose to eat. And so those are other difficult conversations. It's so much harder to talk to someone about stress, I feel, because you almost have to get them to examine these parts of their lives, which then mean they have a hard conversation with the people around them, whereas so much easier just to give them a diet plan. That's what they want. Just tell me what to do. Just tell me what to do,
Yeah.
and I'll just blindly follow it, and all is great.
So let's talk about that, because in the courses that I run, we have a clinical psychologist that has, her PhD in behavior change. And most people, I'm going to tell you, I don't even think they listen to most of those episodes, or they fast forward, because they're like, this is the boring stuff. I want you to tell me what to eat, and I want you to tell me how to exercise. And this is the fun stuff. And I'm like, but if you don't change the habits and the behaviors, you're not changing anything. And I noticed that you said, if you're not losing weight, look at the snacking. For someone that maybe doesn't want to track, or literally, like, every time I always tell my groups when I go into a fat loss phase, which I haven't for a while, but I'm like, I would give myself a C-. Like, here I am running the course, and like, I don't want to measure in ounces everything that I eat, but I can usually do it because I know what's
Mhm.
in the food. I have
Yeah.
the education because I have tracked at some point for education, but I also have changed some of those behaviors and habits around it to get success. So how important do you feel like that is?
It's the thing, Haley. It
Mhm.
absolutely is the habits and behaviors. It's the food prep, you know, it's the food
Yep.
planning. It's knowing what you're going to eat well in advance, if not a day in advance, like maybe several days in advance. Like, I think these are the things that are really important because you can't wing it out there. You know, you can freestyle, like you can prep three different protein sources and two different salads and decide how you're going to have them throughout the week, but you can't wing it and expect to be successful because our environment isn't set up to allow for you to be successful. There is food
Mhm.
everywhere. Like, if you're starving and you're going into, like, I don't know, Walmart or something, and then, I mean, there's food everywhere, but there's even food in like clothes stores like Forever New, and I don't know what other clothes stores you guys have, but but you know, like,
Yeah.
There
where
is
they're never
though.
wrong. Yeah, but if you make
The USA, I mean, I've been to New Zealand and I've been to Australia multiple times, and I'm like,
Same.
there's not a McDonald's and a Burger King on every single corner. Like,
I know.
it's all in your face. And you walk into the Target or the Walmart, and the whole back to school aisle is complete junk food.
Yes,
Crap.
100%, 100%. And the thing is, you do need to exert some discipline and willpower, particularly at the beginning of a fat loss phase, for example. But if you set your diet up right, so you are hitting the protein that we're talking about, you're not overshooting carbohydrate, you're feeling satisfied with your meals, and you have actual defined rules around how you eat. And that sounds very dogmatic. I completely appreciate that, but this is the discipline that you need to exert that allows you to not have to rely so much on willpower. You know, like when you're under fueling and under eating and training faster, and then continuing that fast across the course of a morning, you're like, just like, you've got a lot of discipline up until that point, but you've got very little willpower. It's like a muscle that we exert, and you've used it all in that morning unnecessarily, so, and it just sort of does you in. So the whole idea of no snacking, like, you just make a deal, you just take it off the table. Like, you're just not a person who snacks, breakfast, lunch, and dinner, and you make these rules and you stay by them. And I just think there's real freedom there, because then you don't have to come into every opportunity to eat, like, then you have to make the decision, oh, do I snack, do I not snack, what do I have to eat, how much should I eat? These are things which can really tie people in knots, and so often they get it wrong. Now, if you are someone who tracks calories and you've accounted for these calories and you know how this is going to affect your overall energy budget by the end of that day or the week, by all means, work in your snacks. But if you're not someone who's going down that road and you're just sort of basing it on sort of meals, then I feel like these rules are really important initially. And what I will also just say is that it is actually work to change your body composition and to also maintain that. So, and that's not a bad thing, like, that really isn't. To exert discipline in this space isn't obsessive. It's not like you've got a problem. It's not it's not all of these negative connotations that people often associate with looking after yourself, because it is actually just looking after yourself and your health in the long term. And I'm not sure why we expect that we should just be able to do it, because you just can't do it in our environment. We do have to work on it. And then just when you feel that it gets easy, it then gets hard again. So just expect it to get hard again, so you know that you have to continue to work on it. And just, I don't know, just pat yourself on the back every single day that you've managed to achieve largely what you set out to achieve, and celebrate the fact that you are working towards your health. And I think people don't celebrate that enough either.
That's such a good point. I love that you said that.
Yeah. So if we're looking, I love that you say a good diet doesn't happen by accident.
Yeah.
And for me, I feel like the preparation, yes, number one. But for those people that, again, calorie tracking can work for some people. Some people need it and they love it.
Mm-hmm.
But then for others, they're like, it does my head in. The second I think I'm going on a diet and I have to track, I like push back. Most of the time, if I'm just like, pay attention to your portion size and cut out snacking, you are not going to die by missing your two snacks in the day.
Yes.
No.
Totally. I totally the same. And, and also I find it hilarious that people come into my program, and I just started one actually this week. And so I've got several hundred people in there, and we're talking, and I get all of these emails going, I'm so excited to start this. Can I still eat this breakfast? And can I still do this thing? So we become so attached to our food. So many people
Mhm.
sign up for a plan but don't even really want to follow it. They sort of just want approval of what they're already doing. Like I find that mentality really funny as well. And we change, right? And I always say this to people as well, is that we have these narratives in our head of the type of person we are, the type of foods that we eat, the things that we do. And these are narratives that have just been ingrained for years, if not decades. But you can shift them, and evidence builds confidence. So part of it is, this is why the behavior change work that you do, Haley, is just so important. I wish more people understood that, because that that is what they need to change. They need to change how they talk to themselves about their diet and their fat loss, and the exercise. They have to change how they view themselves. They have to sort of almost change, like, some of what they think they like and don't like. And like tastes change as well. Like, you might think that you couldn't possibly give up your, I don't know, like raspberry frappuccino or whatever it is, but go without for 10 days and you'll find you'll just really love, the new, I don't know, egg white bites and iced americano, whatever it is that you're changing to.
Yeah.
Yes. And when you say you can't eat your way to a better physique. So here we're saying, or I think the nutrition is the biggest component. Most women can get to the gym. My job's easy. I put out the strength program and it's like, well, just go and do it. And then this one overloads onto the next one, onto the next one. If you have intelligent programming, it's hard to do.
Yeah.
Good programming is hard to do. So there's a lot out there that are just all over the place. But the nutrition is what throws people off. So when you say you can't eat your way to a better physique, what does that mean?
I mean, it comes back to what we were discussing with bone, but also like muscle. Like muscle to build muscle, you need to do strength training. Like you
Mm.
can't. Yes, you can lay down some lean tissue by increasing your protein. Like we know that you can do that. So, but ultimately, the biggest driver of that physique change, which is what I think a lot of women want, in terms of being more, they call it toned, but it's actually building muscle. Like
Mhm.
this is the thing that they come to me for. But you need to do the training for that. Like the diet supports a good, intelligent training program. And
Mm.
oftentimes with diet, if you're just relying on that calorie deficit, you just end up being a smaller version of yourself. You're not building your body. You're just becoming a smaller version of yourself, which may or may not be a good thing. And for a lot of women who aren't engaging in strength training, it's not necessarily the best thing. But what I do feel is, like, there's that, a lot of women are quite intimidated by some of the messaging around exercise right now. Like we were talking about the zone 2 training, like you shouldn't do this, you have to do this, all of the rules that are put around that. But as I understand it, is that it's that progressive overload to failure. And you'll know way more than I do, I'm sure, Haley. But it's actually challenging the muscle is the main thing. It's not about having to do um, sets of or repetitions that then place you at risk of injury. I'm not sure.
Exactly. I mean, and I definitely preach using all rep ranges.
Yeah, no.
Because it's you can't stay in one rep range and keep getting, even with varied trainings and overload methods, the body needs variety, but it needs intelligent variety. And there's different purposes and different plans for each rep range. And my goal as more and more women are coming into this space is, I don't want, a whole generation of injured women
Yeah.
that are out for 9 months
No.
because they're like, well, now I have these tendinopathies, or now I threw out my back and I can't do this. Usually it's, well, you did too much too soon,
Yeah.
or, you weren't ready for this, or your form isn't, I mean, there's a lot that goes into it that way, but I don't believe in any absolutes. There's one way, there's tools in a toolbox.
Yeah.
that have to be worked out. And I think that's the message that you're saying for women out there. Like, if this works for you, I'm never going to discredit, that this works for you. If this works for someone else, provided that they're all under the umbrella of everything we've been talking about.
Yeah.
Those are the important things, that there isn't a exact approach. And I think that the women in this age, and you can say how you feel, but they come in almost desperate because they are thrown advertisements every day
Oh, yeah.
about what is the exact thing to do. And they're just like, I'm freaking tired of like, now this isn't good. Now this is good. This is bad. This is what I should be. This is why I'm not getting results. When it's a time thing, I mean, do you ever see body compositions completely change in, couple weeks?
No. And I, people have just promised these results that are just almost seemingly impossible, but absolutely unsustainable. And I feel like that's really important as well. And we spend, for a lot of women, they spend their 30s to mid 40s gaining weight, but not really noticing. It's sort of easy to ignore. And I know some people won't understand this, but literally someone can stand on the scales and be 15 kilos, 30 pounds heavier and not even really realize it because of, they haven't really paid attention, and things get a little bit tight, but you just wear slightly different clothes and you start buying slightly different sizes. And then suddenly you're 30 pounds overweight and didn't even know it. But that happened over the course of, 10 years. Whereas I don't think anyone should expect to be able to then in 12 weeks go back to where they were 10 years ago. So, a healthy sort of a healthy amount of weight to lose in a sustainable fashion might be anywhere from, say, 0.5 to 1% of your body weight. Now, we know that rapid fat loss does work, though. Like, I think Bill Campbell, who I believe is an expert, and he's done some great research to show, you go in, you lose fat, you come out, it's short, it does the job. But I'm not sure how suitable that method is for a lot of people that I work with. But I mean, it's good to know that it can happen. But I think people should look at their, we need to be patient and look at this as like a long-term way of doing things, like a forever approach. And it is like a version of your forever diet and your forever exercise plan. But right now, the version that you might need to use is one that elicits a fat loss rather than one that just allows you to maintain a healthy physique and allow 1 to 2 years for that. Like, I have women that, like, when I started my group program, it was in 2021, and they've done several of my plans, and they sort of come in and they lose like 6 or 8 kilos, and then they maintain that weight for like 6 months, and then they join the group again because they love the community, but they also want to take the thinking out, and they're ready to hit fat loss again. And this is how they use that approach. And I think that if you are patient, you take off the pressure that you have to do it all in 12 weeks, and that it all has to be done immediately. And this is such an important thing, which, we should almost relish this opportunity to make these changes, because they're changes for our health, and we deserve to feel good when we're doing it. And then also understand that it takes time.
Yes. Okay. I'm two important points. Number one, I love Bill Campbell. He's actually coming on to be a guest expert along with you for a Q&A. I mean, and I think he said it once, and he's seriously the most humble, nicest guy. And he's like, I think I know more, about fat loss than anyone else. And this is what I'm telling, like, this is what the science said. This is all I've devoted my life to. So it's so great. But I've had women come in that are like, well, I thought I was going to do a 12-week program and have arms like you. And I'm like, I've been building my physique for 5 years. It doesn't just happen overnight. But to wrap it up, because I know we're out of time, I love your mindset. I love the habits that you teach women. And I love your kind of no BS approach, where it's just like, if the science changes, Mikki changes. And isn't afraid to change your mind based on that, and knowing that we have so much to learn about this peri and postmenopause phase, that in 10 years, our kids are going to be way more better off than we were coming into the space. So that's such an important piece of it too. So I have so many more questions, but
I know
thank you,
Mikki, come
Mikki,
back on again.
for coming on, and just for your personality and for the ability to really give us straight information. That means so much to me, and I just appreciate everything that you're doing in the field.
Well, thank you both. Like, I love to, as you can tell, love talking about this, could talk about it all day. And these conversations I think are really important. So I'm just so thrilled to have the opportunity to come on your show and be able to have them and share them with a wider audience. So thank you so much.
Thanks for listening.
If you enjoyed this episode, please consider giving us a 5-star review and sharing the Body Pod with your friends.
Until next time.